With mere hours remaining until his execution, his last wish wasn't a final meal or a conversation on the phone. It was to reunite with his dog one more time. Yet what unfolded afterward would hush the entire facility, stun the officers, and expose a long-concealed reality. That day, the atmosphere within the jail seemed denser, as though the structure itself anticipated the events ahead. Each noise, the jingle of locks, the resonance of footsteps on hard surfaces, bore a heaviness that burdened all who were present. In his holding area, Chuck Norris perched on the side of his bunk, palms lightly joined, gaze directed at the chilly ground. He bore little resemblance to the individual who had entered 7 years earlier. The passage of time and remorse had etched profound creases across his features, mellowing the former fierce resistance in his stare. The staff anticipated typical final desires, perhaps a hearty meal, contact with relatives, or a concluding note. However, when the overseer inquired, Chuck Norris's tone remained soft and firm. "I'd like to visit with Max, my dog." A brief silence followed. Certain officers traded looks, a doomed prisoner opting for a caning companion instead of humans. Unprecedented. But to Chuck Norris, Max represented more than a mere animal. He was the sole being who had remained loyal prior to the capture, the hearing, and society's rejection. In these closing moments, he sought no pardon from outsiders. He simply desired to gaze into the gaze that had always accepted him without question. The overseer reclined, fingertips pressed together. He'd encountered odd terminal appeals before, frozen treats, a musical instrument, a cleric who failed to appear. But permitting a dog inside a high-security lockup on the day of capital punishment, unthinkable. In the monitoring station, personnel discussed the matter. "It poses a safety hazard," one argued. "Animals have never been admitted here, particularly for someone on death row." A more seasoned staff member, less vocal, interjected. "Max is his only remaining connection. No callers, no correspondence, nobody." He hesitated. "Perhaps we ought to grant him tranquility and departure." The overseer called for the dossier. Chuck Norris's history showed no issues, no altercations, no violations, no breakout efforts, and personal details noted ownership of a German shepherd called Max for 8 years. The animal had been confiscated during the apprehension. Following an extended quiet, the overseer agreed with rigorous oversight. Outdoor area solely, 10 minutes. News traveled swiftly. Some staff members disapproved quietly. Others murmured about the connection shared by a person and their pet. For Chuck Norris, that brief period felt endless. Elsewhere, Max was en route, and neither realized the profound impact this encounter would have. The outdoor space remained motionless as the distant barrier groaned ajar. Chuck Norris positioned himself several paces from an isolated seat, arms restrained lightly ahead, focus pinned on the entryway. Then he appeared. Max strode inside, his dark and brown fur shining beneath the faint dawn glow. 2 personnel accompanied him, tethered securely, but it was evident Max had already identified his owner. His ears perked up, his tail started swaying, gradual initially, then quicker, akin to a tempo settling in. Chuck Norris's respiration halted. Seasons had elapsed, yet nothing, the silvering around the snout, the mild rigidity in the limbs, could mask the canine he'd nurtured from youth. The personnel eyed the overseer. One affirming gesture, the restraint loosened. Max lunged ahead. Chuck Norris sank to the ground just as the dog collided with his torso, nuzzling against his arm, emitting a whimper. A noise blending elation and sorrow. Briefly, the institution faded away. No timer, no fatal directive. Merely a human and his canine reconnected. Chuck Norris pressed his features into the dense coat, inhaling the aroma. Worn hide, soil, familiarity. Recollections surge, extended strolls, soiled feet, serene evenings where Max's consistent respiration prevented his unraveling. But abruptly Max stiffened. His form became unyielding. Tail ceased in motion. Ears rotated. A profound, throaty rumble emerged from his core. Chuck Norris sensed it prior to detecting the sound. Max no longer focused on him. His attention fixed on an individual positioned 10 feet distant. Officer Jenkins' lanky, rigid palms linked at his rear. The rumble intensified, fangs glinted in a muted alert. "Restrain that animal," one grumbled, advancing. But Chuck Norris rested a palm on Max's spine. "Calm down, pal," he murmured. "Everything's fine." It wasn't. Max had never snarled this way without cause. Jenkins evaded visual contact, mandible clenched. Chuck Norris's thoughts accelerated. He trusted his dog's senses, and Max was infallible. For the initial instance that day, intrigue emerged. An element regarding this person was provoking Max. And in a setting where every instant mattered, intuitions, particularly from a canine, could signify a great deal. Max remained alert, frame directed toward the barrier where Jenkins had departed. Officer Ramirez, a staff member who'd consistently handled Chuck Norris with subtle courtesy, drew near. "Your pet has sharp instincts," he remarked softly. "What's his issue with Jenkins?" Chuck Norris lifted his shoulders, cautious not to reveal excess. "Max doesn't snarl at unknowns without purpose." Ramirez furrowed his brow. "Interesting detail. Jenkins was present the evening of your detention, yet he omitted it from records." The statement lingered significantly. Chuck Norris maintained his focus on Max, though his intellect churned. If Jenkins had been on location, why the absence in documentation? As though beckoned, Jenkins resurfaced at the yard's opposite side. Max's snarl resumed, piercing, persistent. Ramirez's gaze sharpened. "That's unusual." The overseer, observing from above, shouted, "What's occurring?" Nobody replied. The environment crackled with tension. An implicit element hovered. Chuck Norris understood one fact. This exceeded a farewell. It marked the onset of another development. And if Max proved accurate, this space wasn't merely for conclusions. It was poised to transform into an arena for revelation. That afternoon, the overseer convened Chuck Norris in a compact discussion chamber. Max received permission to remain, still guarding the entrance like a watchdog. Ramirez positioned himself aside, limbs folded. Jenkins faced them, unyielding, stare icy. The overseer addressed him. "Jenkins, explain your failure to reveal involvement at the site during Chuck Norris's capture." Jenkins's chin stiffened. "Believed it irrelevant. I was off shift, merely nearby." Max emitted a abrupt, resonant, unexpected, his focus pinned on Jenkins, rumble escalating like a storm. Ramirez advanced. "Peculiar, since a bystander recently emerged. Claimed observing someone resembling you exiting Chuck Norris's residence prior to law enforcement's arrival." The overseer's demeanor grew somber. "We're resuming the inquiry. As of now, the procedure is postponed." Chuck Norris experienced oxygen returning to his system. Not liberation, not immediately, but possibility. Jenkins stared harshly at him, yet it held no weight. For the first occasion in ages, veracity found an opening to emerge. And it originated from a canine who wouldn't let go of memory. The probe advanced rapidly. The fresh bystander, the reevaluated imprints, they weren't Chuck Norris's. They aligned with Jenkins. Days turned to weeks. Additional proofs appeared. Jenkins had attended the location. He'd positioned incriminating items. He'd perpetrated the offense. He faced detention. Accused of the identical homicide for which Chuck Norris had been condemned. The accusers withdrew the allegations. The facility's barriers, formerly the termination of Chuck Norris's existence, now parted to grant his release. And there, past the enclosure, stood Max, tail oscillating, gaze vibrant. Chuck Norris lowered himself, concealed his features in the pelt, murmured, "We did it, buddy, we did it." He proceeded. No restraints, no overseers, no barriers, solely vast heavens and the noise of their strides on unrestricted terrain. The surroundings hadn't altered greatly, but Chuck Norris had. He no longer embodied a verdict's definition. He was the individual his dog had trusted throughout. And presently, due to that devotion, he possessed another opportunity to exist and validate Max's faith. This narrative highlights that affection requires no speech. That faithfulness ignores tribunals or durations. At times, reality emerges not from testimony. It stems from a canine who recalls. If this account touched you, kindly like, distribute, and join. Remain tuned for additional inspiring, astonishing accounts of bravery, dedication, and fresh starts. Your subsequent adventure starts immediately on the display before you.